Pasadena 911, what is your emergency?
Burglars breaking into a house next door.
What's the address there, sir?
7418. Not my address, but next door, okay?
Yes, sir. 7418 what, sir?
Timberline Drive. It was a breezy afternoon, November 14, 2007, in a quiet Pasadena subdivision. Two guys, Miguel, 38, and Diego, 30, thought they had this job in the bag. Just another quick, shady score. They'd smashed a window at the neighbor's place, not a soul around, or so they thought. They snagged a bag packed with the good stuff, jewelry, cash, electronics, easy pickings. Stepping out, crossing the property line, they were already planning the getaway, probably feeling smug about their haul. They were focused on the street, not the house right next door. But inside that house, a 61-year-old man named Joe Horn was glued to his front door, and he was getting seriously hot under the collar. Horn was on the line with a 911 dispatcher, his voice tight, basically narrating every busted window and every stolen item. He'd watched the whole sorry mess unfold, and every second the dispatcher kept him on the line, the fury was building. This wasn't just a break-in. This was an insult, a flagrant disregard for the neighborhood, and Horn was going ballistic. He knew, right then, that no matter what anyone on the other end of the line said, he wasn't going to let these dirtbags walk away with the loot. The game was on. The 911 dispatcher, bless her heart, was trying desperately to make Joe Horn chill out, but her words were bouncing right off him. "Sir, officers are on their way. Don't go out there," she urged, trying to use logic. Property is not worth risking your life over. But for Horn, this wasn't about the stuff. It was the principle of the thing. He kept arguing back, citing some new Texas law, his supposed right to intervene. Over and over he repeated, "I'm not going to let them go." You could hear the resolve, the absolute certainty in his voice that this instruction to cut the crap and stay inside was just not going to fly. Every time she warned him, it only seemed to get his back up more. Meanwhile, a plainclothes detective had already rolled up, parked nearby, and was watching the whole scene like a silent spectator. No immediate intervention, just observing. Horn, unaware of the cop, had had enough. He saw the burglars finally exit the neighbor's home, stolen property in hand, moving like they were home free. His final, chilling words to the dispatcher were a stone-cold declaration. "I'm not going to let them go." He had a 12-gauge shotgun in his hands, and he darn well knew what he was about to do. He hung up on the woman, pleading for him to stay safe, and the screen door opened with a sudden, final sound. Horn took the plunge, stepping out onto his front yard with the shotgun front and center. The moment was a whirlwind, a dead heat collision after minutes of mounting tension. On the 911 recording, you can hear Horn issue a brief, shouted command. No one agrees exactly what he yelled, whether it was a warning or just pure rage, because it was immediately followed by the sound that changed everything. Boom, boom, boom. 3 thunderous blasts from the shotgun blew them away. The gunfire lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Miguel Antonio de Jesus and Diego Ortiz didn't stand a chance. They fell right there in Horn's yard, their lights out instantly, sent straight to a dirt nap next to the bag of stolen property. The detective who was observing reported a crucial dark detail. At least one of the men appeared to have been struck from the rear while moving away. This was the detail that would trigger major scrutiny later. They were unarmed, carrying only the burglary tools and the neighbor's stolen jewelry. The entire episode, from the time Horn stepped out to the moment the 2 intruders lay dead, was mere seconds. Yet it ended 2 lives and forever marked Joe Horn's. The stolen items were recovered, the guns were secured, and the only thing left was the grim, silent question of whether Horn had crossed a line. The aftermath was a split decision that rocked the entire country. Once the 911 tape dropped, the public went absolutely nuts. Protesters gathered outside Horn's house. Some screamed vigilante justice, especially since the unarmed men were Hispanic, demanding charges. Others gathered to support Horn, arguing he was a hero who protected his neighborhood and acted lawfully against felony suspects. This whole fiasco stirred the pot in national debates about citizen intervention and Texas's expanded castle doctrine. The legal question was complex because the shooting happened in daylight and on the neighbor's property. Could he use deadly force to prevent the escape of a burglar, even in the daytime? After months of investigation, which included ballistics and the detective's observation, a Harris County grand jury was convened. The prosecutor presented the evidence, the conflicting accounts, and the law. Finally, in June 2008, the grand jury declined to indict Joe Horn on any criminal charge. The system decided that Horn got off scot-free. His actions, in their view, were justifiable homicide under Texas law. For many, the grand jury made the right call, proving that property defense mattered. For others, it felt like a miscarriage of justice. Regardless, the case was closed, but the debate, the feeling that someone left a nasty scar on the limits of self-defense, continued to rage.
Where lawyers painted 2 very different pictures of Byron Smith, the man on trial for killing 2 teenagers in his own home in 2012. Prosecutors call him a man armed and lying in wait. But Smith's attorneys argue he was frightened and trying to protect himself. 5 Eyewitness News reporter Beth McDonough.
It was Thanksgiving Day 2012, but the vibe was anything but grateful in Little Falls, Minnesota. You had these 2 cousins, 17-year-old Nicholas and 18-year-old Kiefer, roaming around, up to no good when they should have been home eating turkey. They were chasing a quick thrill, looking for an easy score, and decided to hit up the house of Byron Smith, an older dude who'd been robbed way too many times before. They probably figured the place was empty, an easy mark to get some cash or pills. But man, they were dead wrong. Down in the basement, the homeowner, 64-year-old Byron Smith, was totally sketched out and fueled by years of paranoia. He wasn't at dinner. He was posted up in his own cellar, waiting in the dark. He'd made the house look deserted, parked his whip down the road, and was hiding with water, snacks, and 2 loaded guns. He was strapped and seething, tired of being a victim. It wasn't just protecting his turf anymore. It was a cold-blooded setup. The air down there was heavy with anticipation, a grim trap set by a man pushed over the edge, just waiting for someone to trip the wire. The silence in that basement was terrifying, a calm before a very violent storm. Nicholas Brady and Kiefer Keir. Nicholas made the first move. He scoped out the property, saw the coast was clear, and broke a rear window to get in. He spent some time creeping around the upstairs, soaking in the silence of the strange house. Down below, Smith heard every creak of the floorboards, his heart probably pounding as he clutched a Mini 14 rifle. Eventually, Nicholas, maybe thinking the basement held the real loot to get ganked, started down the stairs. It was dark, creepy as hell. As soon as his legs appeared in view, Smith didn't hesitate. He opened fire. Bang! Bang! Nicholas tumbled down the stairs, seriously messed up by the shots. He was lying there on the floor, groaning, totally helpless. Instead of calling 911 or just keeping him covered, Smith stood over the kid. He muttered something ice cold like, "You're dead," and fired a final shot point blank into the boy's face just to make sure. It was brutal, man. Nicholas was gone in a flash. It wasn't self-defense at that point. It was straight up an execution. Smith just dragged the body onto a tarp like it was trash and reloaded his piece, sitting back down in the dark to see if anyone else was coming to the party. About 10 or 15 minutes rolled by in that awful silence. Up top, 18-year-old Kiefer Keir was probably getting antsy outside, wondering what was taking her cousin so long. She entered the house, calling out Nicholas's name, her voice echoing in the empty rooms. Getting no answer, she followed his path toward the basement stairs. You can only imagine the fear starting to creep in. This was Sketch City. As she started down the steps, the nightmare repeated itself. Smith, still sitting in the dark, fired his rifle again. He hit Kiefer, and she fell down the stairs, screaming in pain. Smith tried to keep shooting, but his rifle jammed up tight. This is where it gets truly heart-wrenching. Kiefer was alive, hurt, and terrified on the floor. Smith calmly set down the jammed rifle and pulled out a .22 caliber revolver he had as a backup. He walked over to where the teenage girl was gasping for air. According to his own chilling audio recording later, he shot her in the left eye, and then, to ensure she was done for, he placed the gun right under her chin and fired what he called a good, clean finishing shot. It was straight up savage. The silence returned to the basement, now smelling of gunpowder and death. 2 teenagers were lying dead on Thanksgiving, and Byron Smith's reaction was absolutely wild. He didn't freak out. He didn't call the cops immediately. Nope. He sat down and started rambling into a digital audio recorder, trying to justify the carnage he just caused, talking about how he was cleaning up the mess and how they deserved it. He actually left the bodies there overnight. That's how messed up in the head he was about it, and finally asked a neighbor to call the police the next single day. When the cops showed up, the scene was gruesome. Those recordings Smith made, they ended up being the nail in his coffin at trial. The jury heard the whole thing, the calculated waiting, the shooting of wounded teens, the cold monologue afterward. They didn't buy the self-defense plea for a second. They saw it for what it was, a premeditated ambush. They threw the book at him, convicting Smith of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He got life in prison without parole. 2 kids were gone for good over some petty theft, and an old man threw his own life away on rage. It was a total, heartbreaking tragedy.
An 85-year-old woman is being praised for her bravery after fatally shooting an armed intruder who had handcuffed her to a chair. Police say the gunman broke into her home in Blackfoot, Idaho in the middle of the night. While he was searching for valuables, she managed to drag the chair to her bedroom. She grabbed her .357 Magnum from under her pillow, and then she moved back to the spot where he had left her. She opened fire when he came back. Police say the 39-year-old suspect returned fire before he died, shooting the woman multiple times. Her son found her 10 hours later, but she survived.
He was a 39-year-old guy who made the absolute worst choice of his life on a freezing March morning in rural Idaho. He wasn't some high-stakes heist master. He was just a dude looking for an easy score, and he figured the 85-year-old lady living all alone in a remote spot was the perfect target. He was probably scouting the property for a minute, thinking he was about to get a major come-up without any real heat. But man, he didn't know the heart of the woman inside, Christine Jayanian. Derek decided to go full-on monster that day. He smashed his way into her home, probably thinking she'd just fold and give up the goods without a fight. He was living a reckless life, and this break-in was his final desperate play for some quick cash. The vibe was dark from the jump. He wasn't there to just grab a TV. He was there to terrorize a defenseless grandmother. When he crossed that threshold, he triggered a chain of events that was destined to end in a bloodbath. He walked in like he owned the joint, thinking he was the big bad wolf, but he was really just walking into a trap set by fate itself. The silence of the Idaho countryside was about to be shattered by the sound of a struggle that would leave him on a permanent vacation. He was a man with nothing to lose, but he was about to lose it all anyway. He didn't just rob the place, he went full-on savage on an elderly woman who could have been his own grandmother. He cornered Christine in her own living room, and things got ugly fast. He wasn't playing around. He dragged her to a wooden chair and slapped a pair of handcuffs on her, pinning her down like she was some kind of high-level threat instead of an 85-year-old lady just trying to live her life in peace. He was screaming for the combination to a safe, demanding to know where the loot was hidden, his voice echoing through the small house. He even put a gun to her head, threatening to blow her brains out if she didn't stop stalling. It was a straight-up nightmare for Christine, who was sitting there, shackled and scared, while this creep tore her sanctuary apart. Derek was acting like a total loose cannon, probably high on the adrenaline or whatever else he was on, thinking he had all the power. He left her there in the dark, restricted and helpless, while he went into another room to continue his ransack. He thought he'd totally neutralized her, that she was just some frail old lady waiting to die, but he underestimated the fire in her soul. He thought she was just a victim, but she was a survivor who was already plotting her next move while he was busy being a punk. He had no idea the clock was ticking. He came back into the room, probably expecting to see a broken woman, but Christine had managed to snag her .357 Magnum that she kept hidden nearby for just this kind of code red situation. Even with her wrists locked in those cold steel cuffs, she wasn't about to go out without a fight. When Derek walked back into her line of sight, the lady didn't hesitate. She brought the thunder. She squeezed the trigger and blasted him, catching him right in the chest. Derek was stunned. He probably couldn't believe this granny was actually packing heat and had the stones to use it. But he didn't go down easy. He pulled his own piece and started firing back, turning that quiet living room into a straight-up war zone. Bullets were flying everywhere, and Derek was stumbling, leaking blood all over the floor while trying to take her out with him. It was a chaotic, terrifying exchange of lead in the middle of a house that used to be a sanctuary. Christine was hit several times, in the shoulder, the leg, and the abdomen, but she stayed in that chair, holding her ground like a total boss. Derek, meanwhile, was fading fast. The realization that he'd picked the wrong house was finally sinking in as the lights started to dim. He'd brought a fight to a woman who was ready to finish it. He was bleeding out, and his time was running out. He staggered away from the shootout, his body failing him as he tried to make it to the kitchen. He didn't make it very far. He collapsed right there on the linoleum, gasping his last breaths, while the woman he tried to terrorize sat nearby, bleeding but still alive. By the time the dust settled and the authorities arrived, Derek had already cashed out. He was gone, a 39-year-old life wasted over a botched robbery. Christine was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but she's a fighter, and she pulled through, which is a straight-up miracle. When the investigators looked at the scene, they saw the handcuffs, the broken door, and the sheer bravery of an 85-year-old woman protecting her turf. The district attorney didn't even blink. They ruled it a clean kill, a textbook case of self-defense. Derek didn't just lose his life. He became a cautionary tale about why you don't mess with people in the Idaho backcountry. He thought he was picking a weak target, but he ended up taking a permanent dirt nap because he ran into a lady with more heart than he ever had. The community hailed her as a hero, while Derek was just another name on a coroner's report. He came in for some quick cash, but he paid the ultimate price, leaving behind a legacy of nothing but violence and failure. It was a tragic end to a very bad night.
She was the getaway driver in a botched home burglary that left 3 teenagers dead. And
Jacob Redfern and 2 pals were mowed down after they broke into a home outside Tulsa, Oklahoma by the homeowner's son, who opened fire with an assault rifle.
I've just been broken into. 3 men.
Authorities say 23-year-old Zach Peters was defending his home.
It was March 27, 2017, in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and these 3 young cats were looking for a fast come-up. They weren't exactly criminal masterminds. They were just teenagers thinking they could hit a quick lick without any real heat. They were rolling deep with a getaway driver, Elizabeth Rodriguez, who parked the whip nearby, thinking she'd picked the perfect mark. It was broad daylight, a quiet neighborhood where people usually mind their own business. They'd already hit the detached garage and snagged some low-level loot, but they got greedy. They wanted the big jackpot inside the main house. They were all masked up, wearing gloves and carrying brass knuckles and a knife, acting like they were in some high-stakes heist movie. But this wasn't Hollywood. It was a stand-your-ground state. They were hyped up on adrenaline, thinking they were about to get a major score. They didn't realize that the man inside, 23-year-old Zachary Peters, wasn't about to play games when it came to his home. They were about to make a choice that would send them on a one-way trip to a graveyard, all for some stuff that wasn't worth a dime in the long run. The boys moved to the back of the house, looking for an entry point while their driver waited in the shadows. They decided to shatter a glass door to get in, which made a noise so loud it probably echoed through the whole block. They weren't being stealthy at all. They were being reckless and loud. As they stepped through the jagged glass and into the kitchen, they probably felt like they were in total control. They were armed, they were masked, and they were ready to snatch whatever wasn't nailed down. But that crashing glass was like a dinner bell for trouble. Inside the crib, Zachary was upstairs and heard the whole thing go down. He didn't just hide or stay shook. He grabbed his AR-15 and went to see who was tripping in his house. The teens were creeping through the hallway, thinking they were the ones doing the hunting. They were moving deeper into the property, probably looking for electronics or cash. They had no idea that a legal storm was about to rain down on them. They were young, dumb, and full of bad ideas, and they were about to run face first into a reality check that nobody survives. It all went down in a split second in that narrow hallway. Zachary came around the corner and saw 3 masked intruders coming right at him. He didn't wait to see if they were going to pull a weapon or back off. He saw the masks and the gloves and knew it was go time. He let the AR-15...
Are they bleeding?
Yes, I believe one's down, one's still talking. You need to get here now.
Okay, what did you shoot them with?
An AR-15.
Okay.
I'm still armed in the southeast corner of my house.
Quick score ending in a pool of blood. One of them actually managed to scramble back outside, trying to make it to the driveway to reach the getaway car, but he didn't get far before his body gave out. It was a straight-up bloodbath. Zachary was just defending his castle, but for these 3 kids, it was the end of the line. They went from being tough guys in masks to being victims of their own bad choices in the blink of an eye. There was no talking their way out of this. The lead had already done the talking. When the cops rolled up, they found a scene that looked like a war zone. All 3 teenagers were pronounced dead, a total tragedy for their families, but a grim reality of Oklahoma law. The investigation moved fast because the facts were plain as day. Zachary had a right to defend his life. He didn't face any charges because he followed the rules of the state. But the real twist came for Elizabeth Rodriguez, the getaway driver. Since she was part of the felony that led to the deaths, the state decided to throw the book at her. They charged her with 3 counts of first-degree murder under the felony murder rule. She thought she was just the lookout, but she ended up facing life in prison for the deaths of her own crew. It was a harsh lesson for everyone involved. 3 young men took a permanent dirt nap. A young man had to live with the trauma of taking 3 lives, and a young woman saw her future evaporate behind bars. All of this because they thought they could get away with a quick lick. It serves as a cold reminder that once you cross that threshold, you're playing for keeps.
We are learning new details this evening about 2 people accused of burglarizing a Long Beach home earlier this week. One of the intruders was shot and killed by the homeowner. This evening, CBS 2's Dave Lopez has the newest information from a news conference that wrapped up just a little while ago.
When they got there, officers found a deceased female and an elderly male subject who told officers that he shot the woman after...
It was a warm July night in Long Beach, California, back in 2014. Andrea, 28 years old, was running with a rough crowd, looking to hit a lick that would change her life, but she ended up losing it instead. She and her partner, Gus, decided to target the home of 80-year-old Thomas Greer. They probably figured an old man was a soft target, someone who'd just roll over and hand over the keys to the safe. They broke in, acting like straight-up predators, and didn't hold back. They jumped the old man, beating him so bad they actually broke his ribs and his collarbone. It was a cold, heartless move, picking on a senior who was just trying to live out his days in peace. Andrea was right in the thick of it, fueled by the rush of the crime and the promise of a quick payday. She thought she was the one in control, that she was the big bad wolf in this scenario. But she had no idea that Thomas Greer had a different ending planned for this story. He was bruised and battered, but his spirit wasn't broken, and he was just waiting for a chance to turn the tables on his attackers. Once they got what they wanted from the safe, Andrea and Gus thought they were home free. They started booking it toward the rear alley, probably thinking about how they were going to spend the loot. But Thomas wasn't about to let them walk away after what they did to him. He managed to crawl to his bedroom and grab his .22 caliber revolver. He was big mad and hurting, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and pure survival instinct. He followed them out into the night, his vision probably blurry from the beating he'd just taken. As they ran down the alley, Thomas leveled his piece. Andrea, realizing the tide had turned, tried one last desperate move. She looked back and screamed, "Don't shoot me, I'm pregnant!" It was a heavy, gut-wrenching moment, a plea for mercy in the middle of a chaotic crime scene. But Thomas didn't hesitate. He'd been terrorized in his own sanctuary, and he wasn't in the mood for excuses. He pulled the trigger, and a single round struck Andrea in the torso, bringing her world to a crashing, violent halt right there in the dirt. The scene in that alley was something out of a nightmare. Andrea lay there, gasping for air, while Gus kept running, leaving his partner behind to face the music alone. It turned out that her claim of being pregnant was a total lie, just a last-ditch effort to save her own skin. It's a tragic detail that makes the whole thing feel even darker. A young woman using the idea of a new life to try and protect her own while she was actively destroying someone else's. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Andrea Miller was pronounced dead at the scene. She went from being a bold intruder to a cold body in an alley in the blink of an eye. The emotional weight of the situation hit the neighborhood like a freight train. You had an 80-year-old man who'd been brutally assaulted and a 28-year-old woman who'd paid the ultimate price for a robbery gone wrong. It was a messy, heartbreaking conclusion to a night that started with greed and ended in a morgue.
The legal fallout from this case sparked a massive debate that split the city. People were tripping over whether Thomas Greer went too far by following them into the alley and shooting Andrea in the back. Some called him a hero for standing up for himself, while others thought he'd crossed the line into vigilante justice. In the end, the district attorney decided not to charge the old man, citing the brutal beating he'd taken and the fact that he was in fear for his life. However, Gus, the partner who left her to die, wasn't so lucky. Under California's felony murder rule, he was charged with Andrea's death because he was a co-conspirator in the crime that led to it. He ended up getting a long stretch in the pen, forced to live with the fact that his actions cost his partner her life. Andrea's story is a sobering reminder that when you play high-stakes games, the house always wins. She was a daughter and a friend, but she died an unfortunate intruder, a label that will follow her name forever.
Shot and killed in a botched robbery is calling her son a hero. Prosecutors say pharmacist Jerome Ersland murdered Antoine Parker when Parker tried robbing the Reliable pharmacy last year. They say repeated shots weren't necessary because Parker was already incapacitated. Only on 5 tonight, Eyewitness News 5's Jessica Hall.
In May 2009, Oklahoma City was feeling the heat, but the real fire was brewing inside a little spot called Reliable Discount Pharmacy. Antoine was just 16, a kid people called Speedy, probably thinking he was too fast to ever get caught in the system's net. He and another young cat decided they were going to hit a lick at the pharmacy, thinking it was an easy bag of pills and cash. They rolled up, masked and strapped, ready to intimidate anyone in their way. Antoine probably felt 10 feet tall with that piece in his hand, thinking the world was his for the taking. But he didn't know he was about to walk into a buzzsaw. Inside was Jerome Ersland, a pharmacist who wasn't about to let his shop get ransacked. The air was thick with that do-or-die energy as Antoine stepped through the door, demanding the goods. He was just a teenager, making a life-altering mistake, caught up in the hype of the streets, unaware that the clock was ticking down on his very last minute of freedom. He was looking for a score, but he was really just walking toward a permanent exit. The moment the robbery kicked off, things went south faster than a heartbeat. Ersland didn't hesitate. He pulled his own heat and let a round fly. That first shot caught Antoine right in the dome, sending him straight to the floor, clapped and out cold. His partner in crime saw the smoke and booked it out the door, leaving Antoine lying there on the linoleum like he was nothing. At that point, the threat was basically neutralized. Antoine was unconscious, defenseless, and definitely wasn't going anywhere. But this is where the story takes a dark, twisted turn that nobody saw coming. Ersland didn't just call the cops and wait for the sirens. Instead, he chased the other kid for a second, then calmly walked back inside the pharmacy. The vibe shifted from self-defense to something way more cold-blooded. Antoine was still on the ground, barely clinging to life, and Ersland was about to make sure he didn't get a second chance. The adrenaline was pumping, and the line between a hero and a villain started to blur in the most tragic way possible. What happened next was caught on the shop's security cams, and it sent shockwaves through the whole city. Ersland walked past the bleeding teenager, went behind the counter, and grabbed a second gun. He didn't even look stressed. He walked back over to where Antoine was lying helpless, and without a single word, fired 5 more shots straight into the kid's torso. It was a straight-up execution. No two ways about it. The first shot might have been about protection, but those last 5 were about finishing the job. It was a heart-wrenching sight. A kid who had already been taken down being riddled with lead while he couldn't even lift a finger. The community was torn. Some saw Ersland as a man who'd finally had enough of the crime, while others saw a cold-blooded killer who took standing your ground way too far. Antoine never woke up to see the fallout. He was gone. A 16-year-old life snuffed out in a spray of gunfire that went way beyond what the law allows. It was a heavy, somber end for a boy who chose the wrong path and ran into a man with a dark heart. The legal battle that followed was a straight-up circus. Prosecutors weren't having any of Ersland's hero talk once they saw that video. They argued that once Antoine was down and out, the danger was over, and those extra shots were first-degree murder. The jury agreed, and they threw the book at him, sentencing the pharmacist to life in prison. It was a total lose-lose situation. A family lost their son, regardless of the bad choices he made, and a man who thought he was a law-abiding citizen ended up behind bars for the rest of his days. The case left a nasty scar on Oklahoma City, sparking debates about where self-defense ends and murder begins. Antoine Speedy Parker became a symbol of how quickly a quick lick can turn into a tragedy that ruins everyone involved. It's a reminder that when the lead starts flying, there are no real winners, just victims and empty chairs at the dinner table. Antoine's story ended on a cold pharmacy floor, a young life wasted for a bag of pills that he never even got to touch.
We, the jury, all of our number, find the defendant, Marcus Hendrick Karma, guilty.
A Montana man was convicted in the shooting death of a German exchange student Wednesday.
I'm extremely happy that it turned out the way it did. I don't think it could have gone any.
It was a chilly April night in Missoula, Montana, back in 2014. Byron, which is how his friends knew him, was a 17-year-old exchange student from Germany, just a kid looking for a little bit of adventure in the big US of A. He and a buddy were out garage hopping, which is some dumb teen game where you sneak into open garages to see what you can find, usually just looking for some booze or a quick thrill. They weren't hardened criminals. They were just kids being stupid and reckless. Byron saw a garage door partially open at Marcus Karma's house and thought he'd found an easy mark. He didn't know that Karma was totally unhinged and had been waiting for weeks to catch someone in the act. Karma had even left the garage door open on purpose as bait, setting a trap like he was hunting big game. Byron stepped into the darkness of that garage, thinking he was just having a laugh with his friend, totally unaware that he was walking into a kill zone. He was far from home, chasing a silly thrill, and he had no idea the man inside was locked, loaded, and looking for blood. Inside the house, Marcus Karma was watching his motion sensors like a hawk. He'd been robbed before, and he was done playing nice. When the alarm tripped, he didn't call 911 or yell for whoever was there to beat it. Instead, he grabbed his shotgun and headed for the garage with one goal in mind: to smoke whoever was inside. He didn't turn on the lights, he didn't offer a warning. He just stepped out and started blasting into the dark. Boom, boom, boom. 4 shots from a 12-gauge shotgun ripped through the night air. Deeren was caught like a deer in headlights, with nowhere to run and no way to defend himself. He was hit multiple times, including a fatal shot to the head. The sheer violence of it was staggering. This wasn't a homeowner protecting his family from a break-in. This was a man who had baited a trap and waited to spring it. Deeren fell to the floor of that garage, his American dream turning into a bloody nightmare in a matter of seconds. He was just a kid who made a dumb mistake, but he ran into a man who was looking for an excuse to kill. The aftermath was absolutely devastating. When the cops showed up, they found Deeren lying there, a boy who should have been back in Germany dreaming of his future, now just another statistic in a Montana garage. The emotional weight of it hit the community hard. People were furious. How could someone justify killing a kid over some potentially stolen beer? Karma tried to hide behind the castle doctrine, claiming he feared for his life, but the evidence told a much darker story. He had told his hairstylist days before that he was waiting to shoot some kid. He'd set the stage for this tragedy, making the garage look inviting just so he could have his moment of vigilante justice. It was a heart-wrenching realization that Deeren wasn't killed because he was a threat. He was killed because he was an easy target for a man's boiling rage. His parents back in Germany were crushed, their son returning home in a casket, instead with stories of his travels. The Wild West mentality had claimed another young soul, and the world was watching to see if Montana would let a killer walk free. When the case went to trial, the jury didn't buy Karma's scared homeowner act for 1 second. They saw the bait, they heard the witnesses, and they realized that firing blindly into a dark garage wasn't self-defense. It was an ambush. They found Karma guilty of deliberate homicide, and the judge handed him 70 years in the pen. It was a massive victory for justice, but it couldn't bring Deeren back. His death left a void that could never be filled, a reminder of the high cost of toxic aggression and the misuse of stand-your-ground laws. Deeren Dayday's name became a call for reform, a plea for people to value life over property. He was a kid who should have had decades ahead of him, but instead, his story ended in a dark garage in a town he barely knew. It's a tragic, sobering tale about how one moment of stupidity met one moment of pure malice, and the world lost a bright light because of it. Deeren was gone too soon, a victim of a trap that should have never been set.
A teenage burglar has been speaking for the first time since he returned home after serving 3 years in prison.
It was a pitch-black night in August 1999, in the middle of nowhere, a remote spot in Norfolk, UK called Bleak House. Fred was just 16, a kid who'd been dealt a rough hand in life and was running with the wrong crowd. He and his partner, Brendan, decided to hit a lick at this isolated farmhouse, thinking an old man living alone was an easy mark for some quick cash. They didn't have a clue that the owner, Tony Martin, was a man living on the edge of a total breakdown. Tony had been robbed so many times he'd turned his home into a fortress and his heart into a stone. Fred was just a teenager, probably hyped up on the adrenaline of the moment, thinking he was about to get a major come-up. He didn't know the Bleak House name was a literal warning. He stepped through that window into the darkness, chasing a few pounds and a bit of street cred, unaware that he was walking into the crosshairs of a man who'd finally decided he wasn't going to be a victim anymore. It was a tragic setup from the jump, a lost kid meeting a broken man in the dead of night.
Once they were inside, the vibe shifted from easy score to total nightmare. Tony Martin was upstairs, strapped with an illegally held pump-action shotgun, just waiting for the floorboards to creak. When he heard the intruders, he didn't call the feds. He grabbed his piece and headed for the stairs. Fred and Brendan were downstairs, probably whispering and looking for valuables, when the darkness was suddenly shattered. Tony started blasting down the stairs, firing blindly into the room where the boys were. It was a straight-up ambush. Fred wasn't a hardened killer. He was a kid who'd made a massive mistake, and now lead was flying everywhere. He tried to book it, scrambling to get back out the way he came, his heart hammering against his ribs. But the shotgun was too much. Tony kept firing, hitting Fred in the back and legs as he desperately tried to escape the house. The fear in that room was thick enough to choke on. A teenage boy realizing his quick lick had turned into a fight for his very soul. He managed to scramble out of the house, but he didn't get far. He collapsed in the yard, the cold English night air filling his lungs as the life started to leak out of him. He was only 16, lying in the dirt, far from anyone who cared about him, dying over some junk in a farmhouse. It's a heart-wrenching image. A boy whose life was just starting, snuffed out in a spray of birdshot because he picked the wrong house on the wrong night. Meanwhile, Tony Martin didn't even check on him. He just sat in his house, fueled by a mix of rage and terror. Fred stayed there in the dark until his body gave out, an unfortunate intruder who paid the ultimate price for a petty crime. When the authorities arrived, they found a scene that would spark a national firestorm. A kid was dead, a man was in handcuffs, and the whole country was about to go to war over whether a person's property is worth more than a young life. Fred's story ended in the mud of a lonely field, a tragic reminder of what happens when desperation meets a man with nothing left to lose. The aftermath of this case was a straight-up fiasco that changed UK law forever. Tony Martin was initially convicted of murder, and the public went absolutely ballistic. Half the country saw him as a hero protecting his castle, while the other half saw him as a cold-blooded killer who shot a kid in the back. The emotional weight was heavy on both sides. Fred's family lost a son who they admitted had flaws but didn't deserve to die. And Tony Martin became a symbol of a broken system. After a massive legal battle, Tony's conviction was downgraded to manslaughter, and he was eventually released, but the scar on the community never faded. This case birthed the Tony Martin Law, sparking endless debates about self-defense. Fred Barris became a name that stood for the unfortunate intruder, a cautionary tale for any kid thinking about taking a shortcut to a payday. He was a boy who needed a mentor but found a shotgun instead. His life was wasted, his name was dragged through the mud, and he left behind a legacy of division and heartbreak that still haunts Norfolk to this day. In March 2016, Newcastle, Australia was rocked by a case that felt like it belonged in a movie. Ricky was 40 years old, a man who'd clearly lost his way and was battling some serious demons. High on meth and reportedly armed with knives, he decided to break into a family home in the middle of the night. He wasn't just looking for a TV, he was a walking code red, a chaotic force entering a place where people were sleeping peacefully. He ended up in a bedroom where a young girl was sleeping, which is every parent's absolute worst nightmare. He was tripping hard, probably not even fully aware of the gravity of what he was doing, but the danger he posed was very real. When the homeowner, Benjamin Batterham, woke up and saw a stranger in his house, the vibe went from 0 to 100 instantly. Ricky was a man with a long history of trouble, but this was the night he finally pushed his luck too far. He thought he was the hunter, but he was about to become the prey in a fight for survival. The confrontation was explosive. Benjamin didn't just call the cops and wait. He went into full Papa Bear mode to protect his family. He chased Ricky out of the house and down the street, the adrenaline pumping through his veins. This wasn't a professional hit. It was a raw, desperate struggle between a father and an intruder.
They ended up in a tangled mess on the ground outside. Benjamin managed to get the upper hand, putting Ricky in a prolonged chokehold to keep him from getting back up or using those knives. You can only imagine the terror on both sides, Ricky fighting for his life, while Benjamin was fighting to keep his family safe. It was a brutal physical clash in the dark, with neighbors watching from their windows as the life was slowly squeezed out of the intruder. Ricky was struggling, gasping, but Benjamin wouldn't let go, his mind probably stuck on the image of that man in his daughter's room. It was a moment of pure, unfiltered human emotion that was about to turn into a legal disaster. By the time the police arrived and broke it up, Ricky was in bad shape. He'd lost consciousness and suffered multiple cardiac arrests. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was done. His brain had been without oxygen for too long. He died the following day, leaving behind a family of his own and a community in shock. The emotional toll was heavy on everyone. Ricky's family mourned the man he used to be before the drugs took over, while Benjamin's family was left dealing with the trauma of a home invasion and the fact that their protector was now facing a murder charge. The stand your ground debate went global over this one. Was it self-defense, or did the chokehold go on for too long? Ricky Slater became a face for the unfortunate intruder who met someone more determined than him. His death was a tragic end to a life spiraling out of control, a reminder of how quickly a single bad decision can lead to a permanent dirt nap. Benjamin Batterham found himself in the fight of his life in a courtroom, facing a possible life sentence for murder. The prosecutors argued that the chase and the prolonged chokehold were excessive, that the threat had ended once they were outside. But Benjamin's defense team kept it 100, focusing on the sheer terror of finding a meth-fueled intruder near your kid. They argued it was a heat-of-the-moment reaction from a man pushed to the brink. After a tense trial that gripped the nation, a jury of his peers found Benjamin not guilty. He walked free, but the win was bittersweet. He had to live with the fact that he'd taken a life, and Ricky's family had to live with a void that would never be filled. Ricky Slater's story ended on a cold hospital bed, a victim of his own choices and the fierce protection of a father. It's a heavy, somber tale about the thin line between being a hero and a convict, and how in some fights, nobody truly walks away a winner. It was August 2017 in Marietta, Georgia, and the summer heat wasn't the only thing burning up the block. Keandre was 27, a man who'd clearly decided to live life on the edge, and that afternoon, he decided to cross a line he could never come back from. He chose a house where a woman named Miss Green lived with her 3 young kids, a place that should have been a sanctuary of peace and laughter. But Keandre walked in like he was the man of the house, strapped and looking for a confrontation. He wasn't there for a conversation. He was there to exert power. He cornered Miss Green and her babies, pointing a handgun at them and making threats that would make any mother's blood run cold. He was acting like a total loose cannon, probably thinking a woman with 3 kids would be an easy mark to intimidate. He had no idea he was dealing with a mama bear who was ready to go to war for her cubs. Keandre walked into that home thinking he was the predator, but he was about to find out that a mother's love is the most dangerous force on the planet. The tension in that room was at a boiling point. Keandre was waving his piece around, terrifying the children and putting Ms. Green in an impossible position. But instead of folding, she stayed cool as ice, her mind racing to find a way to save her family. She knew she had to act fast before Keandre did something he couldn't take back. She managed to get to her own handgun, a move fueled by pure maternal instinct. When the moment came, she didn't hesitate. She drew her weapon, and the 2 of them traded lead right there in the living room. It was a chaotic, terrifying scene, bullets flying while children were screaming and ducking for cover. Keandre thought he had the upper hand, but he'd underestimated the resolve of a woman who had everything to lose. He was caught in a do-or-die situation that he'd created himself, and for the first time that day, the fear in his eyes was real. He'd brought the fight to the wrong doorstep, and the consequences were coming for him fast. The gunfire didn't last long, but it was decisive. Miss Green's aim was true, and Keandre was hit multiple times. He crumpled to the floor, his life's path ending abruptly on a carpet in Marietta. He went from a threatening intruder to a dead man in a matter of seconds. It's a heavy, emotional scene to think about. The silence that follows a shootout, the smell of gunpowder, and 3 kids who will never be the same after seeing a man die in their home. Keandre Funches was gone, a 27-year-old whose life ended in a spray of violence because he thought he could terrorize a family. He wasn't some mythic villain. He was a man who made a series of terrible choices that led him to a permanent dirt nap. The tragedy wasn't just his death, but the trauma he left behind for that family. He died an unfortunate intruder, a man who tried to take peace from a home and paid for it with his very existence.